Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our TASM professional development sessions. We are rounding out. I think we only have 2 makeup sessions left in April, so most of you, hopefully this is your last session. And as I mentioned, there are 2 more in April that are makeup sessions. We hope to be able to refresh some of the topics for next year, obviously, and look at some of the year 1 things that you guys took. We're going to do an exit survey to get some insight and input on what you'd like to hear for next year or sit for in terms of professional development next year, and then establish another set of priority topics where we can fill those for you based on interest. Today's topic on attention deficit disorder and hyperactivity is brought to you by someone you may be familiar with because she's already done one of our earlier sessions. This professional developer worked in the Sachem School District in the role of special ed teacher and also here for 10 years. She is now a learning consultant at Northside. And so, again, a lot of you are probably already familiar with her. And I know she piloted some work with the teacher aides at the end of last year. So without further ado, a voice and a face most of you are familiar with, Ms. Leslie Routh.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I appreciate the opportunity. Hi, everybody. Ready? Okay. So we're here to talk about ADHD, and this is probably a disorder that many of you have worked with, many of you have encountered. It's really very prevalent. So we're going to start with really just what is ADHD. And ADHD, here I put a little visual of what it is and what it is not. So ADHD, it is a very complex brain disorder. It is a neurological disorder. It's the way your brain functions and is developed. It impacts about 11% of children and 5% of adults in the United States. It affects the brain self-management system and makes it difficult for people to focus, handle their impulses, and work with organizations. ADHD is not a behavior disorder. It is not a learning disability. It is not a mental illness. It is not a result of bad parenting. It is not a result of too much sugar. And it is not a result of video games. These things do not create ADHD. ADHD is actually the change in structure of the brain. It's defined as a persistent pattern of inattentive or hyperactive impulsivity that interferes with functioning or development, or has a direct negative impact on academics, occupation, or some social functioning. And that what it really means is this is something that happens again and again for an adult or a child in multiple settings. So they're having difficulty with impulse control. They're having difficulty organizing themselves. They're having difficulty in all of these areas. Before the diagnosis can be made, you should be having these behaviors for no less than 6 months. And it's also often referred to as attentional dysregulation. You're just unable to regulate the way you attend to things. Sometimes you'll see people who are hyper-focused on something, which is also a form of ADHD, and then you'll also see people who are hyper-focused on something and they go all over the place at the same time. Symptoms you'll see are inattention, lack of focus, poor time management, weak impulse control, exaggerated emotions. This is a big piece of ADHD. Exaggeration of emotions is a real hallmark for kids who have ADHD. Hyperfocus, hyperactivity, and executive function. And you don't have to have all of these. You might have a smattering of them, but they usually expect 6 of them. There are 3 main types of ADHD. Even though it's called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, there's 3 different versions of it. So the first one is prominently inattentive. That means you are just not attentive. You don't necessarily have that hyperactive piece. So those kids have a tendency to go unnoticed for a little while because they are able to sit. They're not jumping around all the time, but they're sitting in the chair and you call on them, they go, what? Because their brain was focusing on something else that was interesting to them. So there might be some hyperactive issues, but you're really looking at impulse issue. They're not clinically significant. The hyperactive impulse piece is not significant enough compared to the inattentive piece. The next type is predominantly hyperactive impulsive. That's the kid who's jumping around. They're like, please somebody sit on this child, stop them from moving. I can't get them sitting down. And they're inattentive, and there's actually a physical manifestation of their inability to attend. And then there's a combined, as with anything else. You can have some kids who are able to sit and attend for a while, and then they have all this pent up energy, and then they can't get it out, and they can burn it out, and then they can sit down and work a little bit again. But then they go back into this cycle of inability to attend physically and cognitively. Does anybody have any questions so far? Great. So what are the causes of ADHD? Genetics play a big role in it. If you have a parent or a sibling with ADHD, your likelihood of having ADHD is significantly increased. And recently, scientists have found that there's genetic factors related to the neurotransmitter that releases dopamine that affects this. So their genetic mapping is making huge strides right now, but there's a connection between the release of dopamine in the brain and, the lack of dopamine released in your brain and ADHD. You can also have ADHD due to brain injury because it changes the structure of your brain. There's environmental factors as a result of lead poisoning. Those things can change the structure. Any sort of alcohol or tobacco use during pregnancy, premature delivery, and low birth weight. Those are also indicators that you potentially have ADHD. We're going to go a little bit more in depth, but there are several treatments that are available. First, ADHD medication. That's a personal preference. There's lots of different ones. There's long-acting, there are stimulants, there are non-stimulants. There's so many medications, so many different combinations of medications. We talked a little about emotion earlier. There's emotional stabilizers that they'll put with medications. That's really best left for a neurologist or doctor to prescribe. But there's also a lot of changes that you can make based on nutrition, exercise, behavioral therapy that can help people with ADHD to cope better with their impulses. I work at the elementary level, and a lot of parents choose not to medicate their children, but they choose to opt for ADHD supplements. So those are things like omega-3 fatty acids that they want to give their children. CBD oil is having a moment, so that's a lot of things that people are investigating to see what works. There's also a lot of practicing for mindfulness, and ADHD people in general also find spending time outdoors to be really helpful for their desire, their ability to regulate themselves. When you spend more time outside in a calmer environment, for a variety of reasons, your stress response reduces, which allows your brain to function in a more appropriate way. So we're going to go into ADHD strategies and how to help students, and then we're going to talk about something called executive functioning, which is really where most people have challenges with ADHD. So if you're working with a kid who has ADHD in a classroom, organization is really, really difficult for these students. And these are some things that you can work on. You can't control everything, but these are things that you, within your day, are able to help a child be successful. So if you know that the child is having difficulty with organization, routines are the best way to help that. So the child just regularly falls into a pattern of knowing what to do and doing it, so that there's no opportunity to become unfocused. It's best to have an uncluttered environment for a child with ADHD. We go into classrooms a lot of times and they have lots of things hanging on the wall, and it looks beautiful, but that tends to distract a kid with ADHD. If there's a beautiful thing hanging from the wall, who wants to hang from the ceiling? That's really fun to look at when you don't want to listen to what there's going on in the classroom. Visual warnings are really helpful. So like if you have a hand signal, 5 minutes, we're going to stop. So the kid sees this visual signal. I know I work with, because I'm the learning consultant, I work with a lot of kids in the building who have ADHD and their teachers. And the one teacher and I were talking about a student, and she said he's really pretty able to control himself, but in social situations he can't. So we came up with this hand signal. That's great. This hand signal means like, do you need a break? Or can you talk to your partner? Are you ready to share? And he would use like one of the two hand signals, so she knew like, was he ready to participate? There was another hand signal for like, in 2 minutes it's going to be you, so you can wait, because he couldn't wait. He had to go. He wanted to share. So this 2 minute was like, okay, in 2 minutes you're going to go talk to your partner if you need a break. So they had these quiet hand signals that respected the dignity of him and allowed him to silently communicate what he needed. Visual timers are also excellent. Kids love to beat a clock, and it also takes the onus off of you as the person telling them to stop the activity. The timer said it's to stop the activity, so the timer is giving you a countdown to end. Structured guidelines are really helpful. So if you say to the student, let's say you're working on a writing example, we're going to do the graphic organizer for 10 minutes. We're going to do the planning part for 10 minutes. I'm going to set the timer. At the end of 10 minutes, we're going to move into the writing piece for 15 minutes. This gives the student the ability to have a time limit, because people with ADHD have a difficult time grasping the concept of time. And then it also sets a timer, so this is going to end at some point. And then when this ends, I'm going to be done, and I'm going to move to the next activity. And then this whole thing is going to end. I'm going to have a break. Workstations free from distractions. Right, I should say free. Workstations free from distractions. So anything extra on the table that they don't need should not be there. Remove it. Making sure that movement breaks are worked into a lesson. So if you're working with a student, you know, like after about 10 minutes they need to get up, get them up, move around the room. Maybe, oh, go sharpen your pencil. Looking for ways to incorporate a movement so that they can become part of like their own independence. Setting short, achievable targets. This ties back into the structured guidelines as well. So we're going to do this task. When you're completed with this task, we'll move to the next task. Not giving them the whole packet all at once. And then color coding or visual supports for organization. So if you know that you have science, everything with the science class goes into the red folder, they see all the red things go into the red folder. Behavior management. So students with ADHD tend to have behaviors. They're off task. You're redirecting very frequently. But making sure that you have simple visual supports with your classroom rules. So even if this is an individualized situation because you are aides, you can't control the classroom rules, but having pictures or something to go along with the rules to remind the student what they should be doing. Giving specific praise is really, really important. Not, oh, good job. Good job what? I was not paying attention. Good job completing that sentence. You know what? You just answered those 3 math problems in 2 minutes. You worked really quickly. That's really specific feedback that a student has so they can repeat the behavior. If you're too broad with, oh, I'm so proud of you, that's wonderful, they don't really know exactly what they did to do it again. So make sure you're specific about what they did and so you can see that behavior again. Praise your efforts as well as the work produced. You want them to tell you they worked hard. It is really hard when you don't want to attend to something that you have to attend to, or that you cannot attend to something you have to attend to. So making sure that that work and effort is respected as well. And giving them frequent feedback, letting them know, okay, you're working really hard right now. We're going to be moving your body. You're sitting really quietly. I can see we're going to move on from now. Inattention. How are you going to help these kids? Again, visual supports are really helpful for inattention. At the elementary school, if anybody attended the one over at the beginning of the year with the behavior interventions, a lot of people in the elementary school carry a visual on their neck, and it just shows you sitting quietly, looking, listening. Visual supports, especially related to classroom rules, are helpful to a student. They get the student to take all the language out and stop and do what they need to be doing. The next one is to be aware of a student's what's called a sensory diet. So if you're not sure what a sensory diet is, all day long we're sitting, you might be twirling our hair, you might be jiggling your leg, you might be bopping around. These are things that neurotypical people do to keep themselves regulated. A child with ADHD has a sensory diet, and especially a hyperactive one, that requires significantly more input, what we call input. So that's where things like the sensory path, how would I have a sensory path yet? Okay. So at the elementary schools we have a sensory path, and it's like basically a maze on the floor of stickers, and it forces the student to work through physical motions that help provide sensory input. Sensory input, deep sensory input, releases dopamine, which is what an ADHD brain is looking for all the time. So if a student is doing frog jumps, it forces their body to get really low, it gives their legs input, and that jump off gives their body another release of input, so they feel that deep pressure. At the elementary school, this goes where I teach, sorry. So we have lots of compression toys. If you ever visit your occupational therapy room, they have the roller or the swing. Those are all things that provide sensory input. So you know your students, when you're working with them, you know the triggers that say, oh, this kid needs a break. And over time, if you speak with your occupational therapists and your classroom teachers, they can provide suggestions that are helpful to students that would provide that deep pressure, that provide the release of dopamine that we're all sort of looking for. The last one is a dedicated space to self-regulate. Nobody wants to do wall push-ups, which is a sensory, in the middle of a cafeteria while their friends are watching, especially in middle school. So making sure that there's a place. And teaching the student you're working with, listen, if you need a break, you can go in the bathroom stall, you can close the door, and you can do 10 wall push-ups, and that might help release, might give you the dopamine you need. That might give you the sensory diet you need. In the elementary level, we have lots of places we can do that in different classrooms, but teaching, as kids get older, they need to understand why they behave a certain way, and you don't even need to use the language of ADHD. I notice you're really fidgety. When you're fidgety, we can go in the bathroom and do some jumping jacks, or we can do some wall push-ups, which are quiet. So those are things that you can work in to help your child become more independent. Impulsivity. So if you know the student has a difficult time with impulsivity, reducing wait time as much as possible. I'm sure you've all been in a classroom where someone's saying, okay, we're gonna hand out the paper in a minute. You're sitting. All right, just give me a second more. You're sitting. All right, I'll be right there in a second. You're sitting, and the kids start to like twitch, and you're like, come on, please, this behavior is gonna happen. I know it's happening. So anything you can reduce the wait time, even if while you're waiting for someone to provide you something, you can do something in the interim to make it last, to make that time feel less short, to make that time feel shorter is better. Having a quick game of like Simon Says, having a quick game of, hey, show me 3, show me 7. You know, we do that for fact fluency in the classroom. Just keep the student moving. Go put this paper over there. Go put your backpack in that thing. Just to help reduce the wait time for the student, because the longer you wait, the more anxious they become, the less they're able to attend. We want to ensure that the praise and the feedback is personalized for each student, so when they're controlling themselves, you sat quietly while you were waiting for that really long wait. That was really great. And you're going to work with the student to discuss what works best for them. All right, so I know that we're going to go into gym and we're going to be sitting for a while. We're waiting for all the kids to come in. What do you think that you could do while we're waiting rather than sitting on the floor and rolling around like a hot dog? What do you think you could do? And then seeing if the student can come up with a plan, because the student ultimately is the person who has to learn to regulate themselves in the real world. And then if we have students with hyperactivity, once again, you want to revisit the sensory diet. A lot of times those students, at the middle school, you have the opportunity to get up and walk every 40 minutes, which can provide some sensory input. But if you know that halfway through the period, it's 20 minutes in, students getting a little antsy, that's where you might want to work something in with your student. You're going to take a movement break. Fidget toys, there's actually scientific research that shows that the prefrontal cortex, that's where everything happens, that's where your executive functioning lives. So it's when they provide contrast, so they do a brain scan, they see that ADHD brains have lower, it doesn't light up as much. When they give them something to fidget with, you see that part of the brain light up more. So that's actually showing that the brain activity is happening in that part of the brain. Fidget toys are annoying, but they actually serve purpose for a kid with ADHD. Even physically fidgeting, just touching something and wiggling or jiggling your feet, helps light up that portion of your brain to help you focus more. You want to make sure that you give breaks between each activity. Stretching or an exercise routine is really great. You know, like let's stand up, let's reach, just move your body around a little bit. It's helpful if you don't have too many options, but it's helpful to break the task into like a physical activity, then something a little more relaxing, maybe a noisy activity again, then a quiet activity, breaking up the day. And then this is really helpful for kids, chunking tasks into shorter pieces. So if you know you're working with a student who has to complete an entire math problem, and this is going to be really difficult for them, all right, first we're going to just read through the problem, and then we're going to take a break and we're going to walk around the room. After we read the problem, we're going to identify the information that we need from the problem, then we're going to walk around the room. And helping the child to even just develop a small checklist on the side of their paper as a lifelong independent skill. So I'm going to read the problem, find the information, decide what to do, and answer it. So they read the information and check it off. Just helping the student to be independent so they can develop their own checklists as adults. So this is all very deeply related to what we call executive functioning. Executive functioning is like an air traffic controller. You're taking all the information in and you're negotiating where it needs to go. So if it's okay, I can play a video, just a sad sound. Okay, I have a 5-minute video from Harvard University, the Center on Developing Children, and they do a beautiful job of explaining executive functioning. Just one second. Okay, let's see if this works.
Science tells us that brains, minds, are built, not born. And at the center of this dynamic architecture are a set of skills called executive function and self-regulation.
Children's self-regulation and executive function are key ingredients in their lifetime performance. It's not just about learning language or learning numbers or learning colors. We have to be able to work effectively with others, with distractions, with multiple demands. These actually are skills that contribute to the productivity of the American workforce.
Look at your shapes. What should you have done next?
Educators, I think, are looking for just this sort of thing. And when we describe what we mean by executive function, they say, yes, that's it. That's exactly, the problem. These kids, they can tell me these rules, but they can't actually use them.
What's this?
A toolbox.
A tool.
What is executive function?
Safety goggle. Probably the best way to think about it is sort of like an air traffic control system in the brain. Just like an air traffic control system has to manage lots of airplanes going on lots of runways and really exquisite timing and so on. A child has to manage a lot of information and avoid distractions. We really think of it as involving working memory and inhibitory control and mental flexibility. Take a situation where a child is having to take turns. So first of all, the child has to have inhibitory control. The child has to be able to stop whatever he or she is doing and let the other child take a turn. But when it's your turn again, you also have to remember what it is you're supposed to be doing. So that pulls on working memory. If the children who are taking the turns after you do something unpredictable, you have to be able to adjust what you're going to do next. And that requires mental flexibility. Children who are struggling with these capacities often look like children who just aren't paying attention, or children who are deliberately not controlling themselves.
If you don't have self-regulation, you act out and the teacher puts you in timeout, and so then you miss part of the learning that's going on, and then you are more upset because you're behind, and so you act out, and so you get this downward spiral.
How does executive function develop?
7 and plus 4.
In little children, and even in the infant and toddler years, you begin to see the roots of executive functioning skills. What's going on in our brains is unbelievably intricate and complicated.
The prefrontal cortex, or the front third of the brain, is important for executive function. But it's more than just prefrontal cortex. This region doesn't act alone. It's involved in controlling your behavior through its interactions with all other parts of the brain. The brain goes from a situation where you've got nearest neurons communicating very strongly with each other and ignoring the rest of the brain, to these widespread networks that are connecting these different areas. Executive function changes over the life course. It improves radically over the first few years. It continues to improve throughout adolescence. It's not until early adulthood that you have the adult-type networks that are very strongly activated that connect different brain regions together.
Let's take notes.
Also, we believe that executive functions can be trained.
It's just like going to the gym. So the more you practice in these areas, the stronger the capacity is likely to become, because you're hoping to strengthen those neural connections.
Mom, you're at 10:04.
Slowly but surely, you're going to be able to step back, and that child's going to go into the world with these skills where they can get along with other people, change rules, and they can be flexible, and they can accomplish new things, and they're unafraid.
I got bit by my dog in my arm. Oh dear.
If we don't learn these skills during the childhood and adolescent years when they're coming online, we are really ill-equipped as an adult to hold a job, to maintain a marriage, to raise children, to get along with each other, to basically be part of a civil society.
You're okay.
Okay, so executive functions is really with the area that your student needs support with, whether or not all students need support with, whether they have ADHD or not. But we know that this is often a deficit for people who have a diagnosis of ADHD. Now, just for a quick example, if you have, so one of the executive functioning processes is to process information, take what you hear and do something with it. So a high achiever is going to, let's say example, look at a book, and right away they're going to say, oh, this book is about cooking. I know how to cook. I know I might need to have a pan, I might need to have a fork, I might need to maybe scramble some eggs, something that you can connect to. The low achiever is going to look at the book and go, oh, this is a book about cooking. Okay. They don't connect those things to the process of the information. A high achiever can identify the important concepts to study. They can take information out. They know how to take notes on it. And they can monitor themselves the entire time. If you have poor executive functioning in the area of processing information, you don't know what to study because you think everything is important. There's no hierarchy. You have difficulty identifying the important information because everything is important. You never throw anything away either because you think everything is important, you might need it later. You focus on irrelevant stuff. You don't take notes adequately because you're just writing down whatever the person says. Has anybody worked with a kid who just writes everything down the teacher says, or nothing, one or the other? Yeah, I see some notes. And they don't monitor their understanding. They're just taking all this information in because they can't process it. If you're working with a student who has poor ability to retain and recall information for executive functioning, people who are high achievers know how to use strategies. So when you know you need to remember something, you might go, okay, I need to remember to get the groceries, I have to walk the dog, and I have to do the laundry. You use a 3-finger strategy. That's like pointing to your fingers. Or you write them down. Or you use an anagram, or something that will attach to you. And then you sometimes develop your own strategy. So my own life, if I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I know I need to remember something, I pull open my desk drawer next to my bed, and I'm like, in the morning, I will remember to send my son in with the paperwork that he needs and fill out the filter form. And so that's the strategy I have for when I wake up in the middle of the night. If you have somebody who has a deficit in this area, they don't recall information, and they don't know how to develop an efficient strategy to remember things. So they don't know how to use like 1, 2, 3, 4, I do these 5 things, I'll be good. They don't know how to pull up a list. They only remember through repetition. My husband has ADHD, and when he was studying for a test, maybe like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, he's a nurse practitioner, he just kept repeating the same information. I was like, you have ADHD. This is not going to help you remember this. I'm telling you right now, stop doing this. And he was like, this is how I remember. And it was a whole argument. But it's not efficient. It's an inefficient way. There's too much information to hold on to. If you have a student you're working with who has a difficulty with organizing materials and managing time, a high achiever is going to stay focused and on track. They're going to keep the information organized. They bring all their supplies to school. They have a system to make sure that their assignments are followed. They complete and turn them in, and they plan and schedule a way to complete a task. Low achievers are distracted often. They don't have a system to organize the information. They forget their items at school. They can't keep track of the assignments. Do you know I'm seeing some more people nodding their heads? Yes. They don't turn things in time. They don't realize how long it's going to take. They think, oh, I'll get this done in like an hour, and like 3 days later, they still have not completed the task or turned in the homework. They run out of time when they haven't finished the project yet. And they require more time than their peers. If you have a student who has difficulty with executive functioning in the area of selecting, monitoring, using strategies, a high-functioning student is strategic about the way they study. They know what's the important information to study, the main ideas, some of the details, and they can figure that out because they have a hierarchy. They have a variety of strategies to flexibly generalize that they can use in all these situations. Like they study for all of the areas in very specific ways. Children who have difficulty in this area, they don't know how to study, they don't use their strategies, they don't use a different strategy for different content, they just use the same memorization or the same activity every time. They lack the knowledge for appropriate strategy, they're ineffective, and they use the same ineffective one again and again and again and again. And they never get anything accomplished. So how do we develop this? So I broke this down into 2 age groups. We have some elementary people with us on YouTube, and then we have middle school people with us here as well. So through ages 5 and 7, card games are fabulous. Memory, matching games. Games where there's fast responses. My kids love to play this game called Taco, Cat, Go, Cheese, Pizza. It's a card game, and you go around the room and you say Taco, Cat, Go, Cheese, and if you put down whatever you're saying, because the cards are out of order, you have to slap it down, and it's interesting to see like how bad they are at the beginning, and then they get faster at it, and you have to attend, and you pay attention to the word you're saying and the game at the same time. and games that have a strategy. Now with games ages 5 and 7, you're going to pick a low strategy game. Physical games, things that are quick responses, a tag, games with balls because they have to like jump out of the way and kick them. Simon Says is a great activity. Structured sports, a lot of our kids at the elementary level do Taekwondo, and it really helps them to learn how to attend and focus. Movement songs, copying games. If it's a game where, like, you know, hands on your head, hands on your hips, hands on your knees, so that they have to do the function. Repeating songs, singing rounds. Does anybody remember singing Row, Row, Row Your Boat in a room and how terrible it went? No, I remember my elementary school teacher making us do it. But it's a way to like hold on to the information you're holding in your head and kind of blocking out the extraneous information while you're still containing it. It's a lot of pieces. Clapping rhythms is another game. Quiet activities like puzzles, brain teasers, logic, guessing games, you know, like I have 4 feet and I say moo, what am I? Hopefully it's a cow. And you can get more elaborate. I spy. Guessing games are great to do with kids while you're trying to reduce wait time. You don't need anything for it. Ages 7 to 12. So we revisit card games and board games. Board games that require tracking, holding on to some information, knowing that you need something else. Like Racco is a really good game where you have to, you know, put the numbers in order, what's important, what's not. It also ties into strategic. Monitoring fast responses, more elaborate matching, strategy, and more challenging games for students. Physical activities, kids in this age group are more prepared for organized sports, something like soccer where there's a team, they have to work with each other. Jump rope games are excellent for working on executive functioning because you got to get your feet to do what your head has to do. And where there's constant memory, something that you have to remember to go back to. Music and dance and singing in general are excellent for students who need to support their working memory. It taps into, like, you know, the need to hold on to a lot of pieces. Your dancing is a physical activity that your brain has to manage. Singing, same thing. Dance, tapping into pieces that your body has to perform and your brain has to do as well. There's a lot of research that shows students who start playing piano around the age of 5 have different ways their brain maps out differently than children who don't. And you're setting up these different neural connections. It's really fascinating. Brain teasers, crosswords, Sudoku, spatial puzzles, and then there's 2 websites, Cogmed and Luminosity. I'm sure you've been advertised by them, some website. They're just cognitive games to play on the internet. Adolescents. To help them develop it, you want to help them goal set. You want them to focus on the planning, help them develop the plan. You're going to talk out social issues that might happen while you're working on the plan so they can be prepared. And you want to coach them to monitor their progress. How's it going? You don't want to tell them because they have to be independent, but like, have you achieved your first goal? Have you achieved the second goal? Self-monitoring, using self-talk is really helpful. You know, to model it and then to have the student do self-talk. Okay, so first I'm going to take out the notebook, then I'm going to put out the pencil, I'm going to put out the workbook, and I'm going to turn to page 3. What are you going to do? Teaching students to be mindful of interruptions. You know that phone is going to distract you. What should you do with it? Should you leave it on the table or should you put it back there? Understanding the motivations of others. So adolescents tend to think that everything is about them. Most people tend to think it's about them. But realizing, like, what did that person, like, how is that other person's perspective going on that they would impact me? So being empathic towards others. And keeping personal journals so that they can track, like, what works, what doesn't work for them. Sports, yoga, music, theater, strategy games, computer games, all activities that are great for adolescents to interact with peers and to expand their executive functioning skills because they have to hold on to information, use it in a variety of situations. And then helping them with study skills. They need you to support them to help break down the project. They need you to help them to identify what would be a reasonable plan. They're still learning how to do this, so that's why we're here. Helping them to self-monitor when they're working, helping them to reduce their distractions. We spoke earlier about how students with executive functioning issues are going to need memory supports to organize themselves properly. Teaching students how to use a calendar again and again and again because they don't use it efficiently. And then reflecting on what worked, what didn't work, and what they learned when they were doing it. And just some really quick little facts. Students with ADHD might need a space to calm down in the classroom and to be on their own at times. They like specific praise. Well done, you just unpacked your backpack. Well done, you completed you completed the reading assessment in a day. Nice job. They like to lead in groups and games too. The kids with ADHD tend to want to be leaders. They would like to know if there's a change in their day coming. They enjoy an active learning environment. They need simple directions. They would like you to be patient, even though it's difficult. And they would like you to be fair and clear with us. Clear is kind. When you tell them what they need to do, they appreciate it. So, does anybody have any questions they would like to ask? Go ahead.
Earlier you said that there's 6 markers
Mhm.
for ADHD, like
Yep.
which are they?
Yep.
If it's just like one thing, it doesn't mean you have ADHD.
Yeah, so the question is, earlier I brought up some of the indicators of ADHD. They usually want, let me just pull it up for you. I'm going all over the place, 1 second. So these are the typical symptoms. You should usually have about 6 of them to consistently have 6 of these indicators to be, for a neurologist to diagnose you with ADHD. ADHD is a diagnosis, it is not a classification. Anybody else? All right, this concludes our presentation on ADHD. Thank you very much.